Okay, so today we're diving into boundaries. And, everybody thinks they have boundaries figured out, but
Mm.
I think there's way more to it than we think. And we're going to unpack all that today with Warren. He's got over 20 years of experience as a creator and entrepreneur.
Wow.
And before that, he was a senior leader in financial services.
Yeah.
And he's worked with a couple tech startups.
Yeah, sounds like he knows a thing or two about high-pressure environments. You definitely need boundaries in those.
Oh, absolutely. And he's got all this amazing advice. He helps you unlock a focused mindset with actionable steps and thought-provoking ideas so you can grow and tackle any challenge confidently.
I like it.
Yeah, so in this deep dive, we're going to be exploring Warren's take on boundaries, why they're so hard, why they're crucial for not just surviving but thriving, and how to actually start setting those boundaries without feeling like a jerk.
Right, because he really emphasizes that boundaries are about survival, not like in a dramatic life or death way, but in the sense of like protecting your energy and your well-being so that you can actually show up fully for the things that matter.
It's like you're constantly running on fumes. You might keep going, but you're not exactly operating at your best.
Exactly. And Warren breaks down why it's so hard to establish those boundaries in the first place. And he points to this fear that we all have, fear of disappointing others.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're programmed to say yes, even when every cell in our body is screaming no.
Yeah, and what Warren highlights is that by not setting those boundaries, we actually end up disappointing people in the long run. Because when we're spread so thin, we can't bring our best selves to anything.
It's so counterintuitive. Like saying yes all the time
Yeah.
actually leads to less fulfilling relationships, less impactful work.
Exactly. You're giving everyone like a diluted version of yourself. And then the other thing is getting clear on what you actually need. Warren emphasizes you can't set effective boundaries if you don't even know what your limits are.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about that? What do you actually need? I think so many of us just run around on autopilot, trying to keep up with the demands of the day, that we totally lose touch with what we need to feel balanced and energized.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly bombarded with all these expectations and demands, and it's easy to just lose sight of our own internal compass, So Warren's point is that taking the time for self-reflection is crucial, like actually asking yourself, what drains my energy? What brings me joy? What are my non-negotiables?
Yeah, I love that. It's like creating that internal map so
Yeah.
you can navigate life with intention instead of just reacting to whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And once you have that clarity, you can start making conscious choices about where you direct your time and energy. Which brings us to Warren's third point, breaking old habits.
Because let's face it, if you've been the yes person for years, changing that pattern can feel pretty daunting.
Yeah, like rewiring your brain. But Warren has a really reassuring approach. He says, you don't have to do a complete overhaul overnight. It's all about those small, manageable shifts.
Yeah.
That, over time, create a huge difference.
Okay, so give me an example. What's one of those small shifts that can start to create those healthier boundaries?
One of the simplest yet most powerful techniques is let me think about it, strategy. Instead of just saying yes to every request, you create a pause. You give yourself the space to actually consider if this aligns with your priorities and if you even have the capacity to take it on.
It's like hitting the pause button on autopilot. You're
Yeah.
taking back control instead of just reacting out of habit or obligation.
Exactly. And that simple phrase can be a game changer because it empowers you to make conscious choices instead of just going with the flow.
Okay, so we've talked about why boundaries are hard. But Warren also gets into why they're so essential. And he uses this analogy of a jar of energy. I love a good analogy.
It's a great way to visualize it. So imagine you wake up each day with this jar of energy every time you commit to something. A meeting, a favor, a project. You're scooping some of that energy out of the jar.
Got it. So the more you say yes,
Yeah,
the emptier your jar gets.
exactly. And here's the thing. If you're not mindful about where you're spending that energy, you can end up feeling depleted, resentful, and just plain burned out.
Yeah, because you're giving your energy to things that don't actually align with your priorities.
Or bring you joy.
Right. And that's where boundaries come in. They're like those little shields protecting your jar of energy. They help you choose what you're going to say yes to. So you're making sure that it deserves a scoop of your energy.
So you're not mindlessly giving away your energy to every request that comes your way. You're consciously deciding what to invest in.
Exactly. And Warren's point is that setting boundaries is not about deprivation. It's about making space for the things that light you up, the things that fill your jar back up.
So it's not about saying no to everything. It's about saying yes to a more fulfilling life. Absolutely. And Warren's perspective is really refreshing because he frames boundaries as a way of saying yes to yourself.
That's interesting. How do boundaries help us say yes to ourselves? I'd love to hear more about that.
It's like when you set those boundaries, you're reducing the number of obligations, commitments, distractions, all that stuff that's in your life
Which frees up time and energy.
for the things that actually matter.
Right.
It's like decluttering your schedule, making space for what you actually want.
So you're not just guarding your energy, you're actually making room for more joy, more creativity, all the good stuff.
Exactly. Warren talks about how setting boundaries allows you to reclaim your time, your energy, for those projects you're passionate about. Spending time with people you love, pursuing creative endeavors, prioritizing self-care, all those things that we push aside when we're constantly saying yes to everyone else.
Yeah. It's like finally giving yourself permission to prioritize your well-being, your happiness. So we've covered why boundaries are so hard and why they're important, but how do we actually put them into practice? Warren gives some really concrete advice, and it starts with identifying our priorities.
Yeah, and this goes back to the self-reflection that we were talking about earlier. Warren really encourages us to ask ourselves the tough questions. What's important to me? What are my values? What are the things that make me feel energized and fulfilled?
Right, because once you have that clarity
Yeah.
on what your priorities are,
Then it's so much easier to set boundaries that are aligned with those values. It's like a filter for making decisions. If something doesn't match up with your priorities, you're more likely to say no without feeling bad.
yeah, for me, one of my top priorities is having time for creative work every morning. So I've started setting a boundary of no meetings, no calls before 10 a.m. It's made a huge difference in my focus and my productivity.
I love that. It's a great example. And it shows that boundaries don't have to be these huge changes. It can be as simple as protecting a little bit of time for something that matters to you.
So we've identified our priorities. What's next?
Well, Warren really emphasizes the power of the pause. Remember that "let me think about it" strategy.
Oh, yeah, that's so key. It's like taking back control instead of just reacting automatically.
Exactly. He says we don't have to feel pressured to give an immediate yes to every request. That pause gives you a chance to check in with yourself, figure out if you have the capacity, and make a conscious decision.
Like a buffer zone between the request and your response.
Exactly. And it's so empowering because you're taking ownership of your time. It's not about being rude. It's about respecting yourself enough to make intentional choices.
And Warren reminds us, we don't have to do this all at once.
Right. You don't have to become a boundary ninja overnight. It's about taking small steps, building that momentum over time.
So pick one small boundary to implement this week.
Exactly. It could be something as simple as turning off your notifications after dinner so you can have some tech-free family time. Or maybe it's setting aside 30 minutes a day for something you enjoy, like reading or walking or listening to music. The key is to start small, see the benefits, and then build from there.
I love Warren's approach. He makes setting boundaries feel achievable. It's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. It's those little changes that lead to a better life.
And he has this cool perspective on boundaries. He doesn't see them as closing doors, but as opening them.
I like that. It's like instead of thinking of boundaries as these walls.
You're creating space for the things that matter, for opportunities that align with your values, with your vision for your life.
You're saying no to things that drain you, so you can say yes to the things that light you up.
Exactly. It's about making choices that lead to a more fulfilling life, a more authentic life. So let's bring this back to our listeners. What's the takeaway here? Why should they care about boundaries?
Well, I think it's because boundaries aren't about being selfish. It's about protecting your time, your energy, your well-being, so you can be your best self.
Exactly. It's about creating a life that's aligned with what you value, not just reacting to everything around you.
And it's about having the energy to pursue the things that bring you joy and fulfillment.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, stretched thin, or just exhausted,
Maybe it's time to take a step back and assess your boundaries.
ask yourself, what are my priorities? What are my non-negotiables? What can I let go of?
And start small, like just pick one boundary to try this week.
Yeah, maybe it's silencing your phone after dinner, so you can just unwind and be present with your family. Or maybe it's saying no to that extra commitment when you just know you don't have the time.
Right. Boundaries aren't about perfection. They're about progress.
Exactly. Those small steps, over time, lead to a more balanced life. And that's what Warren is all about. He helps you unlock a more focused mindset by giving you those tools and ideas to empower you to grow and face challenges confidently.
And the best part is he's created this great resource where he shares all of this and more. You can subscribe to his newsletter, Mindset Rebuild, at mindsetrebuild.substack.com.
Yeah, he goes into all sorts of things. Mindset, productivity, creating a life that feels successful,
Yeah.
and indeed sustainable. Definitely check it out.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot today, but before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question,
Okay.
inspired by Warren's work.
Ooh, I like a good question.
If you could set one boundary today to reclaim some of your time and energy, what would it be?
That is a powerful question. I encourage everyone listening to really sit with that, because sometimes just figuring out that one boundary can be the start of real change.
Yeah, it's like that first domino that sets everything in motion. So what is that one boundary for you? What will it free you up to do? Think about that as you go about your week.
And remember, setting boundaries is self-care. It's about honoring your needs, respecting your limits, and creating a life that feels right for you. You deserve to feel energized and fulfilled, and boundaries are the key to making that happen.
So that's it for this deep dive into the world of boundaries. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing those boundaries.